If you were a kid in the early 2000s, chances are this sound is etched into your DNA, given that the PlayStation 2 is still the best-selling video game console of all time, at least for now. But contrary to popular belief, they did not create this sound by smashing a piano to the ground from the roof of a tall building. Instead, it was part of a larger, more cohesive vision that permeated through the whole package, spurred on by the success of the original PlayStation and shaped by the zeitgeist of the late 1990s. The late 90s was a time of optimism, both in terms of the world in general, but also specifically around technology. The Cold War had ended, Germany was reunified, and many nations were in a prosperous period. At the same time, the digital revolution was in full swing, transforming everything from cameras and TV to music. Mobile phones were no longer bricks you had to hold up to your face, and most importantly, the internet was becoming more and more common in households, connecting people around the world like never before. There was a sense that the future was finally here, that it was the beginning of a new world, and that anything was possible. This also permeated through to culture as well, in the form of the Y2K aesthetic, heavily inspired by futuristic themes and space in particular. And this optimistic mindset is one that Ken Kutaragi, the so-called father of the PlayStation, seemed to embrace as well. His division was responsible for 40% of Sony's profits after the release of the PlayStation. And he also wanted to prove that video games were not just toys that kids would grow out of, so he was feeling pretty ambitious. They named their custom CPU the Emotion Engine, due to its supposed ability to synthesize emotions. And in an interview, Kutaragi referenced recent studies that pointed to playing piano being able to delay the onset of dementia, and said that he hoped that the PS2 could do the same. The design of the box itself actually came from an Atari patent from years earlier, though it's also likely heavily inspired by the monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey, adopting a darker, more slick look and incorporating the space aesthetic that was all the rage in those years. It's also a great metaphor for the PS2, being some sort of alien object descended from space that this primitive world couldn't comprehend. This concept was also the starting point for the PS2 startup sound. Our old friend Takafumi Fujisawa, who created the startup sound for the original PlayStation, was still working for Sony at this time, but instead of being a one-man show, he was now managing a team of people to handle all things sound related on the new ambitious console. So instead of making the sound all by himself, he held a contest among his team members to see who could come up with the best sound, and then picked his favorite. The brief came down from Ken Kutaragi himself, which was to design the sound around the concept of a monolith floating in space with the Earth in the background. And I want you to keep that in the back of your mind as we analyze the different parts of the sound. Now, let's start with the most memorable part of the sound, which, just like the PlayStation 1, is a big synth chord that rings out. The loud, sudden, and imposing nature of this symbolizes the big monolith landing somewhere, so I will call this the arrival. It was created on the EMU Orbit sampler, using the preset Key Rush, a piece of gear used commonly on tracks in the underground rave scene, which were also an inspiration for the Y2K futuristic aesthetic as a whole. And just like on the PS1 sound, Fujisawa wanted to emphasize the fourth interval, or in other words, use quartal harmony, stacking a bunch of fourths on top of each other instead of the usual thirds, to create a minor 11 chord of some sort. He claims that this shows stability and strength, but I would also add that it leads to a quite ambiguous and mysterious sound, since you aren't really emphasizing thirds, which give chords a lot of their traditional major or minor character that we're so used to. As part of this sound, there's also what sounds like a sparkly descending melody on top. When I hear this, I think of the flashing lights inside a spaceship, and it just goes so well with the visual of descending slowly towards the towers, which themselves also arguably symbolize a developed and futuristic civilization. Such a cohesive little package. Also, fun fact about the towers, in case you didn't know, they were generated dynamically based on the number of unique games you've played and how many times you've played them, which is a pretty nice touch. Now, even though that's the main and most memorable part of the sound, there needs to be a backdrop for the arrival to happen onto. And there are a few background layers here that make this happen, which I will call the void, because I think this is meant to represent space itself, or maybe a planet's atmosphere. Firstly, we have this sound, which is also the brief hum you hear just before the chord hits. And you might have recognized the end part with the filter sweep, because you can hear this quite clearly after the main chord has faded. And it matches beautifully with the flying, colorful orbs visual, perhaps meant to symbolize a shooting star or a spaceship of some kind. There's also a couple of low, noisy, but slightly bubbly sounds that I believe are played as part of the void. I will admit they're a little harder to hear in the sound itself, but it is possible with headphones or a good set of speakers, once the big chord hit has faded. This works to give some more body to the sound, and I think could be representing all the background radiation that exists in space. Now, there's one final part of the sound, which is where the camera dives towards the towers and is accompanied by a rush of white noise. Now, this is a little harder to fit within the monolith landing metaphor, but it evokes the feeling of going through a portal where a whole new world of fun and excitement awaits you, which I guess is a pretty nice way to prepare the user for the game. However, in certain cases, that portal seems to lead you straight to hell. Just like the PS1, the PS2 sound is also generated in real time, including the sequencing of samples, the panning, the reverb, and the envelope. If the console can't read the disc for whatever reason, the console shows the red screen of death, where the user is hurtling towards a bright red light just barely visible from an opening between smoky clouds. The sounds are also pretty creepy, where a new sound takes us into the red screen of death, followed by slowed down versions of the sound from the void, the low rumbling noise, as well as some other noise that sounds like crashing waves, most of which are also used as the backdrop to the system menu screen. A really lovely experience late at night when you're a little kid, I'm sure. All the little parts that come together to make up the overall sound are just so good at representing the space theme, and it works together with the visuals so beautifully to build a coherent narrative that was new and exciting for users, while also being culturally relevant at the time. Even today, 25 years later, hearing that sound evokes the feeling of wonder, and like you're stepping into a portal to the future. Kutaragi and his team had knocked it out of the park once again, and proven that video games were not just toys for kids to grow out of. Unfortunately, his next project wouldn't be such a walk in the park. If you enjoyed this video, there's some more for you to watch over here. You can support the channel on Patreon or on Buy Me a Coffee, where we also have a host of Max for Live devices, if you're interested in that sort of thing. And you can also join our Discord server. All the links are in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Mixed Signals. Bye bye.